Welcome to the Tech in Shanghai podcast, the Pearl of the Orient. Shanghai is the city of the future. All systems go, full steam ahead. It never stops. Technology, innovation, ambition. It's everywhere. Join us as we explore this new world and talk to the people making it happen. The Tech in Shanghai podcast. The future is now.
So everybody, welcome back to the Tech in Shanghai podcast. This is the show dedicated to the people of the Shanghai startup scene. Today we have a very special guest, Steve Mushero of ChinaNetCloud. Steve has been on the scene in Shanghai for quite some time and involved in a lot of very interesting businesses both here and in the United States and indeed around the world, and a lot of interesting projects. So Steve, let's just get it kicked off. First of all, welcome to the show. Maybe you can describe for our listeners a little bit about ChinaNetCloud, what you guys do, and then we can get rolling from there.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So, yes, I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of ChinaNetCloud, and our job is really to help Chinese companies operate their internet infrastructure. So we're internet guys, but we're internet back-end guys. So we really focus on the servers, data centers, infrastructure, all the sort of boring parts that really keep websites, games, apps, mobile, e-commerce, and all those things up and running. So our customers build all the exciting, sexy front-end stuff. We build all the boring, but yet essential back-end systems. And then we run them 24/7. So our job is really as an operations company. We're running the back-end infrastructure for things.
Right. Now, I mentioned to a few friends I was going to be having you on the show today, and the consensus question from everybody was, what is the cloud? Because we know it's a catchy tech term. We know, there's some great marketing and branding. It's a great metaphor. And I think everyone has a basic understanding of what it is, but let's hear it from the horse's mouth. What exactly is the cloud?
Well, there really are two clouds, as I think of it these days. You're right. It has come from everywhere. Everybody has cloud everything. I have cloud coffee. I have cloud cars. I have everything is a cloud, right? In fact, we do have a cloud car company as a customer. But so basically there's two parts. One is consumer cloud. This is what most users think. This is like Dropbox, Evernote, and sort of iCloud from Apple, things like this, where I as a consumer can have an iPad or a phone and I store stuff on the cloud. I don't have a hard disk anymore. And that's really nice because obviously you can share it very easily and it's just very useful. For us, though, the cloud is more infrastructure where you're buying servers and other things that run your website. The same thing in the cloud. I don't have to buy hardware anymore. Traditionally, you had to buy servers. So you went to Dell or IBM or HP and you said, here's $100,000, give me 10 servers. And you go and put them in a rack and you kind of power them up and run them. But now you don't have to do that. You can just go to Amazon or in China, Alibaba or other people and say, give me servers for the next 2 hours. And here is $100 and just use them. And yet they function exactly the same way.
Right. So
that you really get rental use almost versus buying somewhat.
Right. So the basic hardware infrastructure is still in place. There's no magical cloud up in the ether.
Correct.
It's just that you can gain access to it without having to make that investment, right?
Correct. Yeah, somewhat like a condo timeshare almost,
right,
where you can go buy a house or I can just go rent a hotel and similar things. And with some of the issues too, because if I rent a hotel, it's smaller.
Right.
And the certain issues and so on, different than owning a house in a city. Cloud is somewhat similar to that.
And is one of the main benefits of the cloud its flexibility in that, if I was a startup company and I had to buy a bunch of servers, then I have a set capacity for what I can do versus if I engage in a cloud service like yours, then whatever I need, I can get just that amount, and that's what I can pay for. Is that generally the idea?
Absolutely. I mean, for a lot of people, there are different benefits to different people, but certainly the flexibility is an important one, both up and down. So I can start, reality is, as a startup, people often start, they launch a product, it's not that successful initially, they have to adjust it, change it, try again. Right. It may take a year. Well, if I've spent $100,000 on hardware, that's sort of sitting there wasted for all that time period, where if on the cloud, I can launch it, I can shrink it, I can grow it,
right,
I can change it, I can decide to try something new. And also it makes it very innovative because an engineer who wants to try something can just go get a server for a day or a week.
Right.
Try something really cool. Even at a startup, that's really hard to do because no one has the money. And that creates innovation much, much faster.
Right. In terms of the history of the cloud, now that we have a basic working understanding, when did both the term, but more importantly, the service become available to the market?
That's a good question. I'm not sure anyone's traced back sort of the first words of the cloud. To some extent, consumer cloud is an outgrowth of sort of software as a service and some of these older terms that were used even 10 or 15 years ago. But I think current cloud comes from a variety of things. Salesforce.com sort of talked about cloud apps more than 10 years ago. But I think most people think about the cloud in our world as Amazon. So about 10 years ago, Amazon and sort of related companies started offering these types of software and computers as a service. So that's when it really started, I think. And people started thinking, well, if I don't have the hardware, it's not very reliable, not very useful, and so on. So why buy that? It took a long time. Right. Really, the last 5 years, maybe 6, 7 years, has it really taken off? In the last 3 or 4 years, now Amazon and people are growing, 30, 40% a year. Right. People estimate Amazon's business is probably $5 billion US
for their cloud service.
For the cloud service, and they only have about a third of the market. So it's a $10 or $20 billion market, up from essentially zero 10 years ago. So it's and now it's just coming to China, really. So.
And in your opinion, what impact does this have on the speed at which companies can establish themselves and grow? And what kind of overarching impact does this have on startup and tech companies in general, bringing down that barrier of setting up initially, as it seems?
I think it does exactly that. It lowers the cost. As I mentioned, it really increases the flexibility because, like I said, you now can innovate very easily. You can try something new. You can duplicate. You can give every developer their own server, which was really hard to do before. You can try new things. You can really jump around and do stuff at very low cost. Right. That's a big benefit. And also, some of the clouds that have more advanced services, it's not just the computers. Now, Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, companies in China offer additional services like databases, so you don't have to manage it yourself. Or they have queue services or payment services or all these other things that were hard for you to develop yourself before are now just there as a service. Right. You want to send emails? Pay $1. Here it is. Right. And that also, again, speeds things to market. Yeah. And so I think it's been part of the sort of Silicon Valley. The cost of developing new businesses has dropped a lot for many reasons. This is an important part of that.
Right. And you come at it from a highly technical background, am I right? That's
correct.
Your education, and you've been in this industry for a long time.
Yes, longer than I care to admit.
What are the, if any, the security differences and or risks between cloud computing and cloud hosting and serving versus the traditional, like you have your own hardware servers? And is there any?
Well, there's concerns, let's put it that way. I think the reality is that in the end, for most companies, for most issues, there's no difference. Right. In practice. There certainly is the concern, of course, that if I'm putting all my data up in your cloud, well, you can steal it. And or other people can steal it. They can cross so-called the barrier and get to your system. This has never actually happened anywhere in the world that I'm aware of. So it's a theoretical risk, and it's one you should probably think about a little bit, but not something significant that I would, that is more important than the benefits you're getting. So it's not something we worry about day to day. Okay. We have a couple cases where that's an issue, but that's an issue anyway. People forget that in a regular data center, people can walk in and steal your servers. Sure. And so if you're storing credit card information or other very highly sensitive things, you need to deal with that anyway. Right. The reality is it's a lot easier to walk into a random small data center and steal a server than it is to steal data off of a cloud. Right.
And I was reading prior to this interview the amount of data that's actually in the cloud. I mean, I know most of that information is private, right? And we can actually hopefully get some insight into that later. But I was reading that estimates of just the top 3 or 4 cloud service providers, somewhere in the vicinity of over 1 exabyte. Is that the right term?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, a lot.
Which is a shitload of data.
Yes.
How closely related are this? Is cloud computing and cloud services, and the work that you do to another very big buzzword in tech and startup scene today in big data? Because obviously the cloud is ostensibly holding a lot of this data. Does your company and or do other companies do anything with that data, or is that a totally different business?
It's related because, big data is certainly a sexy term of the day. Big data really is about large data, as you can imagine, and typically about behavior streams and or data on people. For example, I was talking
for consumer purposes primarily?
Usually consumer purposes, although, in theory, oil drilling is big data because you have a lot of data about seismic stuff. And so it's been around for a long time. But historically, some of the sexiness of big data is that it's, for the first time, really accessible. In other words, again, the oil companies and IBM and the military have always had big data systems, but they're extremely expensive. You need supercomputers to deal with it.
Right.
There's I think it's an HP company, Teradata. They used to sell you, $10 million boxes to deal with big data. So Walmart uses that to track their products. Today, you and I can get that on Amazon for $50.
Right.
And so suddenly you have a lot of data, you can process it. So if you're an advertising company or a mobile app company, you used to be able to just say, well, people use my apps. I don't really know what they do. When I was at Tudou, if we wanted to track all the actions of all of our users, it was something like 10 billion events per day. And so if you want to track, stop, start, pause, it's a video company, right?
Yeah.
You want to do pause, start, stop, what do they look at? We can get all that data, but we're doing 100 million videos a day. If you collect 10 things per video, that's a billion things.
Yeah.
Now, look at that over a month and tell me what the most common thing is. This is a big job.
Sure.
So, but now you can do that.
Yeah.
And so people do that. So inside their games, inside their apps, they start to look at what does every user do all the time. And
Right.
before, you really had to sample that. You had to figure it out. You had to sort of look very carefully at a little bit of the data. Suddenly, you can look at all the data and draw interesting conclusions, and you can do it fairly easily. It's not trivial.
Right.
And that's what a lot of these big data companies are doing. They're making that easier for you. Say, okay, you've got 50 billion events. Now here are ways to work on it and slice and dice it without spending $10 million. And that's the sexiness of it. And then how do you look at it? How do you use it? How do you draw insights as a consumer? How do you profile people? How do you figure out who's who? How do you figure out who's buying what? Things like this.
It's incredibly interesting to consider all the different ways that could transform pretty much every industry and everyone. Is the marriage between cloud computing and data and big data and the interpretation and usage of that data just now, like in its infancy, could we say?
I think so, because big data is still hard.
Right.
We're trying to do things that cost $10 million 10 years ago and required an army of experts. Now it's within your reach.
Right.
The most common system you'll hear about that does this is something called Hadoop, which is named after an elephant. But Hadoop is sort of the big, sexy system that everyone's using. It's open source, but it's not something you pick up and use in an afternoon.
Right.
It's not really used much at all in China. It's just starting to be. It takes quite a bit of experts and a lot of books to figure out what you want to do with it. But that's still a huge step forward.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's very much in its infancy. Some of the related companies are starting to get funding. So, in 5 years, you'll be able to do it yourself.
Right.
But
now I'm going to come out of left field with this one, but is big data and the interpretation of it and the way that we go about using it, could that be like the doorway into, getting closer to something like artificial intelligence? Because basically you're taking much more data than anyone, even the human brain, could ever use and actually make sense of, and then you're trying to draw conclusions of it. Now, I know it's a bit out there, but does it seem like it could be the entryway into something like that?
Perhaps way down the road.
Yeah.
I think, the big data is really about the data, of course, and drawing conclusions from it. That is usually not the artificial intelligence problem that people are thinking about, depending on how you define artificial intelligence. That's much more about algorithms. For example, playing chess.
Right.
Playing chess is not about memorizing all the possible moves. That's easy. There's only so many moves.
Right.
It's thinking about how many can I do and what's my opponent going to do. It's the thinking part of it.
Sure. It's the drawing from that data to come to a conclusion, an action, something.
Right, and just the algorithms, and usually not that much data is required, although sometimes.
Right.
But as soon as you get to the threshold where the computer already knows all the words if you're trying to speak to it, or knows all the chess moves, or knows all the things, then it's about speed and power and sort of algorithms.
Right.
How does a brain think? And there's more progress in that. The data part of it is probably not that important.
Right. I'm just geeking out because I'm trying to look. I'm looking at if you have that amount of data and piece by piece, time by time, if you have that many algorithms in place so that the data can be interpreted, at what point will you have the marriage of the two to such a degree that, I guess technically it still wouldn't be it wouldn't be quote unquote intelligence, but it would have such a decision making capacity that it could seem so. You know what I mean?
Potentially, I don't think the data influences it that much.
Right.
In other words, I think already the systems that are trying to do that have enough data. Giving them 10 times more data doesn't really help them.
Okay.
Same as trying to play Jeopardy. That famous IBM had a
computer
playing
Watson,
Jeopardy.
Right?
Watson, yeah. he didn't need to know more facts. He already knew them all, right? He knows all the Wikipedia, everything. He knows some battle in 1620 with some general did something, knows that.
Right.
The question is, can you put it all together fast enough, and can you think about it? So the data part of it is interesting, not nearly as much, though, as still trying to make forward the intelligence part.
Okay.
So that's still a ways off.
Sure.
And becomes more important in things like robots. So where you really see interesting confluence is where we start having these like Japanese personal robots that help you and assist you and figure out what you want. And that's where there's, small applications, but those are the ones that are people are trying to solve.
Right.
And military.
Next steps, yeah.
Next steps and useful today.
Sure,
and
sure.
data really isn't a big part of that.
And speaking kind of along the same lines, how, to me, big data and the Internet of Things seems very closely related because, one couldn't really, or the Internet of Things doesn't really have an existence, at least it doesn't have as big a usefulness without something like the cloud. So my question, my line of thinking here is in what ways do you see, given your closeness to the industry and the work and the technology, cloud computing and the Internet of Things changing the way we live over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's one of those areas you can't see very far.
Right.
Because
you never know what's
you don't know what
going to pop up.
For example,
and take traction.
I understand that Amazon is now offering so different types of Internet of Things. My refrigerator should be on the Internet. Well, what does that mean? My coffee maker, different things. My lawn sprinklers. I mean, those are all useful because I can control them. Kind of obvious. Turn the lights on in my house. Stuff like that. That's okay. But example, Amazon is releasing a product that you can reorder food out of your refrigerator. So, and if you run low on milk, the refrigerator knows it orders milk, and by the time you get home that day, milk shows up. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Or because you always open the refrigerator and go, oh, I wish I have to put on my grocery list to buy this thing. Well, today you have apps to do that. You have a bunch of different ways, but they're producing, I understand, a tablet that sits right on the phone, right on the refrigerator, magnetic. You just close the door and touch, order right there.
Right.
Credit cards are already remembered. Everything's in the cloud. And by the end of the week, you just say, yes, I'm home Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. The guy shows up, gives you everything.
Right.
That's a big convenience, especially for a mom who has to take her kids to the supermarket and kids are screaming. And, there's a lot of, I'm not sure that's life-changing, but it is to them.
Yeah.
And same thing with, reordering, food or fuel or water or just all these sort of nuts and bolts things.
Yeah.
Those are sort of practical. Beyond that, I think it's hard to see.
Sure.
I'm sure a lot of companies are thinking about it. There's all these wearables.
Yeah. Seemingly, too many, or too many to count at least.
Right. And there's also the Google Glass.
Right.
Is that an Internet of Things? That's kind of a thing.
Sure.
It's kind of a very advanced thing.
Yeah.
And it's now actually being used to control other things. And so when you start tying that together, when I can walk through my house with some sort of implanted or glass type thing,
right,
and other things in the house are now connected to that, is that useful? Can I turn lights on? What can I do with that? How do I can I see where my kids are upstairs playing? I just go, oh, kids, and I can see what they're doing outside. Or I don't know. And then how does that impact a bigger world?
Sure.
Sure.
It's certainly
it's very cool.
Yeah, and it seems right now that things are. Perhaps all the times it goes this way, notwithstanding a few big game changers like the iPhone and stuff, but things are coming together in piecemeal so that in 5 years, maybe you will walk into your house and know where your kids are and your fridge will have everything ready and the oven will be on and things will be cooking, but maybe all managed by all different things or maybe all managed under one operating system or device or something like that. But it is, there seems to be a real race on right now for wearables and all that sort of technology, the Internet of Things. And it's interesting to speculate which one is going to take hold in the market because it may not be the iWatch. Maybe people don't want to have that experience on their wrist and interact with it that way. But no, it seems like all that stuff is brought together by cloud computing and the Internet of Things. So, you could give us a bit of background on ChinaNetCloud. You and yourself, were working in Silicon Valley in the U.S. for a while. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I it's been a number of years in Silicon Valley working on all kinds of different things. I was there. I was fortunate enough to arrive just in the middle of the bubble or just at the end of the bubble.
Okay.
So by the time I really got myself situated and the house and all that, the whole economy crashed. And at one point, I think the U-Haul has these statistics on how many people are coming to a city versus leaving, which is usually somewhat balanced. And it went from, twice as many arriving to something like 4 or 5 times as many people leaving.
Right.
Because everybody was just graduating. Because you could graduate in the 90s and come to San Francisco and make, $50,000 or $80,000 a year with zero experience.
Right.
Computer scientists can now do that for $100,000. But, so it sort of crashed. So there's a lot of different things going on of startups. And I did some biotech sort of things for a while. And big company things, and so did a lot of different stuff. But yeah, mostly in Silicon Valley.
What was the scene like then? I mean, pre, but especially post crash. Because I would imagine that was the area that felt it hardest. The whole world felt it, but certainly Silicon Valley was the center of the tech bubble and the tech startup scene. So what was it like being there when it all fell apart?
Yeah, it was quite interesting. It was really. Before I was looking. I don't have my calendar anymore, but I used to show people my calendar in my phone of like '99, and it literally was 3 or 4 parties a night, like open sushi parties. You could go to the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco and have all the drinks, all the sushi, and there'd be 1,000 people there. And this would be a random launch party of some company you'd never heard of. And you could do that every day. It was just crazy. And apartments were renting for, you had to rent an apartment. You had to show up at 6 in the morning with your resume, with cash, not a check, but cash, and get in line to rent an apartment. And I've heard actually it's recently done this like this again. But it was really, really crazy. And then after that, it was not like that. The traffic sort of disappeared. You could drive everywhere.
No more sushi.
And there was no more free sushi. I had to buy my own sushi. And so it was really a challenge. And a friend of mine runs a site called Work It, which is all of the events and seminars and meetings and so on in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And it's interesting because during the .com days, it's all about building your startup, taking over the world. And then suddenly it changes into surviving the downturn, changing industries, how to litigate your way out of this, raising money when the evaluation is falling.
Right.
And you can sort of see the pulse of the valley,
go
sort
down
of up and down based on this. And of course it turns back up again and then down. And so it's quite interesting.
Was the writing on the wall when you first arrived? Because everyone likes to say in hindsight, like, oh, it was so obvious as a bubble, and companies were getting billion-dollar valuations with absolutely zero revenue. It wasn't on the wall. There was too much excitement, too much ambition, too much.
I think that was obvious.
Yeah,
and that was all. Maybe unsustainable is too strong a word, but that was all like, this is not really a good idea.
Right.
But at the same time, there's so much money. You've got companies going out and going public for billions of dollars.
How can you resist?
So how do you? Yeah, and they did these things, right? So how do you stay on that gravy train? So it's kind of interesting. And then we're sort of in this again.
Right.
And,
well, I was going to ask you. So now we're coming into a period where tech and startups and for a variety of converging reasons, but it's the industry itself has gotten a lot of hype again, and there's a lot of hype behind it. It's growing rapidly. There's so many interesting things going on. It seems like there's, some of the lessons from the .com bubble have carried over, and, valuations aren't as crazy and the hysteria is not as high. But, what are the comparisons between then and now for you?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think, however, it's certainly bubble feeling. So people that went through the last bubble, and of course Silicon Valley is all about bubbles since the 50s.
Right.
But there seem to be more fundamentals. So the cost of doing things has dropped a lot. So in the 90s, you had just tech companies just raising huge amounts of money and sort of blowing it all. You have Webvan. People are trying to really change the world. You don't see that so much right now, other than things like Uber, who are trying to change the taxi industry. Which is good. But you had Webvan and people, we're just going to change the complete grocery industry. We're going to change the complete medical delivery industry. We're going to change all the way doctors work. All these guys, and let's blow $200 million trying to figure that out, and then it doesn't work for a variety of reasons. So there's a lot of that going on. You don't have that now. Uber now is raised a lot of money in different people. That's after they've shown success. So nobody's saying, hey, I'm going to completely transform an industry and give me 7, 8, 9 figures of money and let me go try to figure it out.
Right.
It's much more low cost. Let me do an Instagram. Let me do even a Twitter or these type things. Let me show traction, show that it works, show I can make money. Even like LinkedIn, which is really just a linking site. We had a lot of those in the 90s, but LinkedIn has like $500 million in revenue. So these are real businesses. And I think people figured out that lesson that we're not going to change the whole world. Elon Musk is trying. And doing a great job in his way, but he's also showing a lot of success. But no one's raising hundreds of millions of dollars on completely wacky ideas to sell pet food. They're doing something small. They're using cloud computing, which is low cost. They're rolling out quick things, doing it very quickly, trying things, seeing what works, and then raising money on that, and then moving forward, then raising more money, and then delivering real businesses to go out. I think that's the difference. And so it's much more sustainable. The amount of money being deployed per kind of project and per outcome is much lower, so the risk is lower. That's a big difference.
So on average, maybe going after more niche problems and also focusing more on fundamentals of business, perhaps at least more so.
I think so, and not necessarily niche problems, but solve things in a new way.
Right.
Rather than I'm going to just take over the grocery industry.
Right.
It's like how do we do something like Instagram, or other than I'm going to do something that interests me.
Yeah.
And of course, enough people do things that interest them, and you can do it cheaply, and you execute it well. Now a bunch of those become popular,
Right.
and they can grow.
Yeah.
So I have an idea, I want to do X. I get $1 million, and I go do it, and then a lot of people like it, and then we grow it from there, and we sell it into WhatsApp or all these kind of things.
Right.
So it's not so much a niche; it's more I think people are interested, and they think they can do it, and they for a small amount of money can actually demonstrate it,
Right.
and then grow from there.
Okay.
I think that's a big difference from what happened before.
Now, you again, I think everyone's so fascinated on where this is going, because I think if you ask anybody, most people would say that, or at least it seems like, given the technology that surrounds us increasingly, there's an acceleration of things in general, especially technology, and the way that we incorporate it into our lives, the way that we use it, the way we communicate with it and interact with it. It seems to be accelerating, and you can read people like Ray Kurzweil and Peter Diamandis and these guys who talk about the future of abundance and things like that, and the exponential growth of technology and the exponential reduction in price for certain technologies. You've been around the block, you've been on a variety of different scenes, and you see it from the technical point of view. Do you have a take on that?
I think that's true. I mean, a lot of different levels. Technology is certainly lowering things. Just look at how fast the smartphones, take
Right.
over. I mean, certainly the iPhone took over the U.S. very quickly. But even in a place like China, went from, this is the world's largest mobile phone market. So there's 600-700 million, or maybe 1 billion people using phones here. And in 2 years, they went from something like 10% smartphones to 60.
Yeah.
So they bought like 250 or 500 million smartphones in 18 months. And that's an interesting industry. Interesting that none of those smartphone makers made any money, but still very interesting how fast things can happen when you have the right sort of confluence of things, especially in the consumer world.
Yeah.
You're seeing different things in more traditional industries. It's still obviously much slower, but I think you're right. And now the wearables, Bluetooth, all these technologies come together, and some of it's just enablement, right? Because now I have a phone that's actually a very powerful computer,
Right.
Where I've never had that before. I never had a computer I could take with me. Short of a laptop, which isn't really conducive to a lot of consumer lifestyle things. Suddenly I have a very powerful computer with me, and that unlocks, it's kind of a tipping point, you might say, to unlock a lot of other things until I have that. And now someday I'll implant it or something. But I think, definitely things are getting faster, quicker, but also easier.
Right.
Now you have the iPad is a much easier, nicer device for my parents than trying to teach them how to use Windows.
Of course.
And so technology is not, the iPad itself, technology is nice, but it's more just a way of thinking. Of course, Apple drives a lot of this. How do you make it easier, simple, faster? And then that unlocks a lot of other things.
Right. Cool. So you worked in Silicon Valley for a bit. When did you start getting involved in China? And why?
Yeah, 2005. So I was actually, I used to go to school in Japan many years ago. I did part of my MBA in Japan in the 80s.
Oh, me too.
Back when...
not my MBA, but I went to school in Japan for a bit.
Back when Japan was taking over the world.
Sure.
I was probably there before you. But
Yeah.
I was there when, whatever 1 square meter of Tokyo was worth more than all of California.
See, that's amazing. You get to see, because you're in China, you've been in China for a similar period in their history as well, right? Extremely robust growth, and you saw it unfold in Japan, and how they managed it and what happened as a result. I'll get your take on that in a second, but go on.
It was very interesting. And so, I was there in '89, and right at the peak of what they call the bubble. They still call it the bubble.
Sure.
And it was very interesting and a lot of different things. But I was also there when they changed emperors and all this sort of kind of change from the old to the new guard. It was very interesting. But so I've always been interested in Asia, of course, and in business, and been back somewhat. So I happened to be in Japan in 2004, end of the year, and I was working on a book. And if you ever try to write a book, it's impossible to find time to do it. And so I would go to Japan and hide in Tokyo and go focus and try to get the darn thing finished.
It's a fun place to hide.
Yeah, well, then it's kind of counterproductive sometimes. But, and then so I happened to meet a guy from IBM, a senior IBM guy, who was running all of Asia for parts of IBM's consulting business. So I was talking about, hey, how do I come back to Japan? I was thinking about Japan at the time. Come back to Japan and maybe work for IBM and then get settled and then kind of go from there, right? And he said, this is in 2004, he said, there's no jobs in Japan because the economy was still quite poor. But if you thought about living in China, in Shanghai, and up until then, China really wasn't on my radar. I hadn't really thought about it much. Obviously, I've made in China, but hadn't thought about kind of being there. And so it took me a few minutes to think, well, could I sort of sell everything and sort of give up and just move to Shanghai? And about 30 minutes, I'm like, yeah, I could. And so a couple months later, started studying Chinese, and 9 months later, I was here. And so and then I split my time back and forth between Silicon Valley and here for a while.
Involved in different projects.
Because I wanted to make sure I could do something here that was useful. Sure. Fortunately, Silicon Valley and Shanghai then and now still have probably the tightest relationship of any U.S.-Chinese cities.
Really? Sure.
In terms of people back and forth, not only business-wise, investment-wise, but a lot of the returnee Chinese you meet here who are running companies, their families all live in California.
Right.
And because they came back to start something, they left their family in high school, whatever.
Yeah.
So I already had a lot of friends here. A lot of people that already had moved here, or people said, hey, meet this guy, go see that guy. So I had quite a network even before I got here. So basically I spent time meeting people, networking, going to parties, talking to events, and gradually getting consulting customers and started just doing things here and convinced myself that I could actually not starve.
Right.
And so gradually increased my time here until I was here full time.
Right.
So that was almost 10 years ago.
Wow.
And it was really very exciting. I wanted to come because, it's like Japan, like you said, it's sort of a chance to watch another important country sort of blossom on the stage, if you will.
Yeah.
And also, like Japan, China is very important, very large, even larger. So the language, the culture, the people, all that stuff is really important to understand sort of for the future. And also, though unique to China, I think chance to watch an entire sort of society go from the 19th century to the 21st in 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Because it's just condensed, right? Every generation here, every 5 years here is a different generation of people. And from an anthropological point of view, and I love doing anthropology, kind of thinking about these societies, this is the only place to watch that, right?
Totally.
And then the Middle East has its own different ones. Africa has its own different sort of challenges. But China's doing all of this, sort of going to iPhones. You have, pig farmers with iPhones, right? All of kind of in one little microcosm in some village somewhere. That's cool.
I'm constantly just in awe of the dynamic that's transpired. I mean, here over the last 10 years, the last 50 years, the last 100 years, their ancient history, their postmodern history, their tumultuous history, the culture, the language, everything that's going on. I mean, it's just such a compelling and interesting place to be over the last, pick your time period, but especially now because you're seeing the confluence of all those things and the compounding of all those things, but also the rapid way in which old ideas, old cultural items are being shed and new things are being onboarded and adopted at an extremely fast pace.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, I'm a big student of China's recent history, sort of from 1850 on.
Yeah.
I think I've read about every book about that period. And so it's really very interesting because it's a lot of what's going on now is exactly what happened then.
Right.
Almost, if you go back and read about, and whether it's the things you want to complain about, like employees or issues or culture or new technology, if you go back to 1910, 1920, all the newest technology was here the same way.
Right.
That the second or third movie theater or movie place in the world was Shanghai.
Yeah.
It was like Hollywood, New York, and Shanghai, right? Things came here first.
Well, in the 20s and 30s, right? Shanghai was an extremely culturally rich city, right?
And people were studying English.
International city.
Yeah. Young people studied English, and there was a lot of poverty here, too, and a lot of, obviously, differences. And the Chinese were not well treated in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. But sort of the upper classes were teaching English. They were wearing Western clothes. They were bringing in all kinds of technology. They were, going to Harvard, all this sort of stuff. And to some extent, we're repeating that.
Yeah.
And we're repeating that sometimes in the same buildings that it happened 100 years ago. And, in the same mechanisms.
Which is part of the charm of Shanghai versus other Chinese cities. It has that old world sort of colonial culture, right?
Exactly. You can walk the streets where these things happen, and both good and bad. And, and so, and a lot of some of the same problems they had then, they still have.
Sure.
And things are much better off, obviously, all the way around. But I find that very interesting because some of the same threads run through a lot of stuff.
Yeah, me too. So you arrived in China in 2004. Then you dipped your feet in the water. You found a way to keep the food and the roof over your head. Then at some point you started with Tudou, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I came in 2005.
Right.
But
2005,
in 2007 I was looking for more substantial things to do, and ended up getting connected with some of Tudou's investors and so on. 'Cause I was looking for CTO type jobs, chief technology officer. And Tudou was looking for that also. So we sort of got connected and did some consulting with them and kind of worked back and forth and finally ended up joining them full time.
And for those who don't know, Tudou is now one of the largest Chinese video hosting sites in the country, right?
Oh, correct. So even at the time, we were bigger than YouTube.
Wow.
So when they started, they're actually older than YouTube. So
are they?
Yeah, they are.
When did they start?
2005, I believe.
Okay.
And so, even though yes, reality is a lot of companies in China are copies of Western models. Tudou is actually 6 months older than YouTube.
No way.
And originally started as a video podcast idea. and eventually started doing video. And of course, the video market then and now in China is much different than the West,
Right.
In terms of the content and so on. But yeah, definitely not a copy of YouTube. Still doesn't have some of the features that Tudou had then,
Right.
because it was Tudou and these companies really were video broadcasting companies in the sense they were TV channels.
Right.
And
Did they create their own content?
They did later, but reality is it was mostly pirated foreign shows early on and Chinese shows. But
which was great if you lived here then.
It was great if you lived here. And
TV
also
shows
amazing sort of things it sort of demonstrates. You would have things like Sex and the City show in the U.S. at, say, 9 p.m. on a Monday.
Right.
Within a couple hours, that would have been downloaded or uploaded, subtitled by entire societies of people who just live to subtitle,
Right.
which is not an easy job. Subtitled and uploaded and coded and so on, and then released. And so that, for example, we had features to release stuff. So you because each person would become a publisher, you would release it to your 50 million followers, and we would have massive downloads in the next hour because they'd all want to download the latest thing. But the whole sort of production cycle, all sort of by people randomly by themselves, and you'd follow certain people. Like I like your subtitle, so I would follow you, not that guy.
Oh, okay.
And so subtitlers and sort of uploaders had email lists and followers and comments, and you could do things. But it was very interesting, and so.
And was there just touching on the IP issue with early Chinese video sites like that? Was there, would the content creators in the U.S. and Europe and wherever they're coming from even attempt to contact companies like Tudou and be like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that? Or did everyone just know that you're not going to get anywhere with that sort of thing in China?
I think that I wasn't really close to that, but it changed over time.
Yeah.
I think early on, people just ignored everything, as I could tell.
Yeah.
But then, there's more, was and still is, more work to try to regularize that,
Right.
particularly when you started doing advertising. Because the dynamic was you didn't want to be advertised. You didn't want to, Coca-Cola is not going to advertise or does not want to advertise next to an illegally pirated
program, yeah.
And then, so you have the question, well, which of the things you have are pirated? Which is actually a very hard question to answer.
Right.
Because people are uploading stuff, you don't even know what it is. So it could be a video of my cat, or it could be Sex and the City. How do you tell the difference?
Right.
From the title? It's actually a really hard problem. And 100 people upload Sex and the City, or 1,000 every day. And so we're getting 50 or 100,000 new videos every day. Well, go figure out which ones of those are pirated.
Right.
That is still a ridiculously difficult problem.
Sure.
And then try to find the licenses. So it all evolved over time. There was definitely an effort to, and still is, to regularize this, to buy licenses and get proper contracts. And it's an ongoing process, but it was a dynamic. It wasn't as a dynamic process.
Sure, I bet. Now, Tudou was a startup, right? It wasn't
Correct.
one of these, properties developed by Tencent or one of the big companies.
No,
it was a startup.
Yeah.
What was it like, and what are the differences between being a startup in mainland China versus Silicon Valley, cultural wise and operations wise?
Well, that was interesting. When I started working with them, they had about 35 people. And when I left, they had about 350.
Wow.
Most of which were sales. But startups, I think this is starting to change, or has changed. This was, they started 10 years ago. Startups were very rudimentary, I guess you'd say. Very common to have bunk beds in the office.
Right.
In fact, I just read something about Alibaba's early days. So they had apartments and rooms full of people who could sleep.
Real bootstrapping.
Yeah. And almost like construction sites here, right?
Yeah,
Because construction sites here provide housing, and you sleep there. So it's a very low cost, which you don't see in the West. And so that's...
using the term housing fairly loosely.
Loosely, although not so bad, perhaps. But depends where. But in Shanghai, I think. But... And you don't see that anymore. Right. I haven't been in a startup that had sleeping beds in a long time, but 10 years ago they were really common. So that's one difference. You also still have this concept, I think, in China that is not less common elsewhere, of sort of the Laoban. They tend to be the boss, right? So you have the founder and a lot of minions.
Right.
Where companies in Silicon Valley tend to be the reverse. If you're not careful, you have 9 founders and 3 employees,
right? And
you have chief bottle washer, and you have all these other useless jobs. And not enough people to do stuff. Here, there tends to be 1 or 2 founders and no management and just a lot of people.
Right.
And so when I got to Tudou, it was like that. There was sort of the CEO and a couple people helping, and then just an army of people, like 35, 40 people. So I was part of the first wave of sort of VP and manager types to sort of come in and regularize that. And so that was a big transition, I think, for the company. and still in a market we didn't know how to make money in and what to do with. And so,
was there other quote-unquote Laowais working there at the time?
So I was the first.
Okay.
And
that must have been interesting.
That was interesting. And my Chinese was definitely not very good. And so that was a struggle.
Yeah.
And so I was the only Laowai. Soon after, about 3 months later, Dan Brody, who's fairly well known around, joined from Google. And so Dan's a fluent Chinese speaker. And so
he made you look bad.
Not so much. No, not so much. Dan's great. And but Dan had come from Google, and where he was Google employee number 1 in China, actually. Wow. And of course, Google is lavish with just staff and money and all this stuff. He had expectations that were quite high,
right?
Which weren't always met by a small, scrappy Shanghai startup.
Sure.
It was quite but he could yell at them and swear at people in Chinese pretty effectively, and I couldn't.
Important.
But it was quite interesting. They screwed up his visa, and he was unhappy about that. Lots of choice words. But anyway, so it was only the two of us,
right?
And then,
and is it a more? I see it being a more rigid startup culture because everyone has seen images in Silicon Valley and other places where it's pool tables and sushi and colors everywhere and a culture of failure and innovation and that sort of thing. Here, was it a bit more like just head down work, or was it?
Yeah, I think you have to separate those things a little bit. Yeah. It's definitely head down work.
Not that the counterparts in the West don't have that attitude, but you know what I mean.
Right. It's definitely. I was impressed with it, and remain impressed with the work ethic. People work very hard. Mm-hmm. They don't necessarily work 7 days a week like you might see in the West. It's hard to get our employees to sort of have that perspective as much. Although they do work hard and work late, and sort of, but there's very much an overtime sensitivity here that there isn't so much in Silicon Valley. So people work hard, and I'm not sure it's really very strict. But what you don't have, though, is sort of the dynamic free-for-all exchange of ideas, sort of that classic innovation challenge. It's still very much the boss says this, we do this,
right.
As opposed to coming up with new ideas, thinking outside the box, thinking about my products. Developers classically are not, given ideas about product here, which they would be, I think, more in the West.
And that must slow innovation to some degree.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the innovation comes from the top,
right.
Broadly. And that's not true in every company, in every place, of course, but there's still a cultural environment in which we're working that is still a challenge.
Sure. And so what year did you leave Tudou?
2008.
2008. And why did you leave?
A variety of reasons. One, it was an ongoing challenge to be the only Laowai there, and the company dynamics and so on. But also, I wanted to start this.
Yeah.
So
right after Tudou, you started laying the groundwork for ChinaNetCloud?
Correct. Because the problem we had at Tudou, one of the problems, and that I saw, the problem we wanted to fulfill is, we're Tudou, right? We're really famous, have lots of money, had, very well-known kind of thing. And we couldn't find enough engineers and enough people to run our systems.
Right.
And it was just very difficult, being ridiculously famous, to get people. It's like being Microsoft kind of thing, right? And you can't find people. And so if you can imagine that's difficult for them, then what is it like for every other company here? And again, we're in the world's largest internet. We've got 600 million users, growing fast and all this. Who's going to build and run all this stuff? And so the idea was to start the company to solve that problem, right. So fill this big gap. And at the time and now, the Chinese internet is getting more and more, let's call it serious. So you have to make money. Now, if you're doing videos and they're all free, or you're doing blogs and you lose a couple, not a big deal. My video doesn't play.
Sure.
But if you're doing e-commerce, you're doing banking, you're doing healthcare, and you screw things up or lose stuff, this is much more serious.
Yeah.
And so not only is the place growing faster, but it's becoming more rigorous, more serious in a whole lot of ways. Mm-hmm. And yet the amount of people available to do the technical work is really not growing very fast. And that's true across a whole variety of professional areas in China. There's not enough people to make coffee or to run hotels or to do any, lawyers. There's just not enough people given how fast the economy has grown.
Yeah.
But in our little sector of the world...
Or at least qualified people. Right?
And experience, because who has 20 years running hotels?
Sure.
Nobody, right? Who has 20 years doing anything in a lot of sectors is a serious challenge. And then when you grow it, 100% a year, there just can't be enough lawyers, everything to go around,
sure.
right? So same problem in our world, where it's grown, 20 times in 10 years, and there's 20 guys. Mm-hmm. And so that was why we started the company.
And what were the early days like? I mean... did you have a clear vision from the beginning? And
yes.
Because a lot of entrepreneurs and people that are either in the startup industry or want to be listen to this show, I'm sure. And can you give them, I mean, obviously you're coming from a very experienced background, which might be a bit different from them, but when you left Tudou, it could be akin to taking away that safety net a bit. Everyone has to make that choice at some point in their career. What were the early days of ChinaNetCloud like? Where was your head at, and how did you push things forward?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit different because, we had kind of seen the industry closer and I've been in a lot of startups and experience. But we did have a pretty good vision, I think, that we're still adhering to here 5-6 years later. Yeah. We actually had a meeting at Starbucks in June of 2008 and sketched out sort of where we fit in the ecosystem and kind of what we'd be doing and how it figured out. And that diagram's on our wall today. And we're still doing that.
Right. And there was competitors at the time.
No, there's still no competitors, really.
Really?
And so, we still are doing fairly unique things. Even in the West, there's very few companies doing this.
Doing what specifically? Cloud?
No, doing
compute?
operations.
Operations.
So really people that will come in and either take over your existing system. So we're one of the very few in the world who will come in and take over an existing large system and fix everything. So it's like repairing your car while it's running.
Right.
So we have one right now that's maybe 50 servers, lots of problems, lots of issues, security problems, reliability problems, everything problems. And we will come in and overhaul it completely and fix it and operate it while it's running.
Wow.
While it has millions of users. So almost nobody does that because it's really difficult. Separately, if you're a new company coming to us and say, hey, I'm going to come to China, or I'm in China, or I'm starting something, we're going to launch we just launched a new medical site for a big Chinese company. And, just started last week, and we're going to have it built this month and released. And so we will build and run that for them. So other people that can do that, are very few. A lot of people can plug the hardware together and can plug all the cables and make it all work. And, okay, it's all running here. Good luck. And walk out. We don't walk out. We actually pick it up from there and run it for its lifetime.
Right. So being that you take that approach and there weren't any competitors, was it a hard sell at the beginning to convince people of what you guys do and the value of it, or B, was it something when you inform people or pitch people that you were providing that service, they were like, well, thank God, let's get going?
Both.
Yeah.
I think in China we're a little early. Because people here do not, from the Chinese side, don't outsource. And, services are sort of a whole new concept anyway.
Right.
Just the idea of buying services. Very much people want to buy hardware. They very much want to sort of touch things and have it very concrete because then, I can't be cheated or I can't be stolen. I trust it. It's mine. It's an asset. It's like buying houses here, right? It's a massive sort of drive to physicality. So even in large companies paying for services, consulting, these kind of things, even lawyers struggle with this. Nobody wants to pay for their advice, right? Even though it's obviously very important. So I think that's changed over a number of years. And my partner saw this also because he was in the consulting business where people didn't want to pay. They pay a lot for hardware, but pay nothing for how to use it, and which is sort of backwards in a lot of things. So we still have that challenge. It's evolved quite a bit. And fortunately, we're on the internet, which is very fast moving. People are very young. They're very internationalized. They've done a lot of things, so they understand a lot of these things. But it's still a challenge sometimes to explain, pay us money for nothing in the sense of a service.
Right.
Or service
Can't hold it in your hand.
Exactly.
Now, where is ChinaNet? I mean, do you guys have like football fields of servers somewhere, or do you? I mean, what does ChinaNet look like now? I know you've got several clients, but from looking on your website, you've got some big clients. Where are you guys now in terms of your position, your market, and your growth trajectory over the next however many years?
Sure. So we do not have a lot of servers. We mostly leverage our partners. So we are actually China's oldest cloud computing company. We offered cloud computing, Amazon's type cloud computing in 2008. But for us, that's not an ideal business. It's a high capital, sort of low margin business. We only did it because nobody else was doing it and because we wanted to build the expertise and we wanted to build a lot of technology and so on in that. So today, we don't have to do that. We can leverage our partners like Alibaba and Tencent and Amazon and a lot of others.
So your core business is more on the management and operational side?
Exactly.
Right.
Very much on building and operating things. So that's nice because we actually capture more of the revenue stack for less of the capital. So we get paid more than the guys who build the servers, but we don't have to buy any servers.
Right.
So we have to focus on the people, of course, and process and systems and technology and tools, and we have a lot of those things. And so we have, nearly 100 people based in Shanghai. We have a sales office in Beijing and now in Silicon Valley. And
Have you had to raise money?
Oh yes,
Yeah?
yes, yeah. So another part of our challenge, and so you mentioned how we started out. So we started in June with this diagram what we want to do, and we started putting together how we're going to do it and different things. We had very fortunate to have some friends hook us up with some friends that had office space, and actually a company who had become our first customer. And we moved into their office. It was me, my partner James, and my assistant from Tudou who came with us. And so it's 3 of us, and they had about 25 people in their office. A year later, there was 25 of us and 3 of them. And we're still in this office, and we eventually sort of took it over and ate the whole thing. But so this was in 2008, you might remember. So this was in August, we moved into the office, and in September, went out to raise money. And you might remember that in September, the entire world economy fell off a cliff.
Tough time to raise money, yeah.
And so you would go to angels and say, well, I want to raise money, and they're like, well, I have no idea how much money I even have. Well, I don't even know how much I have, right? Because it's in free fall and all this, so come back later. And so our original plan to raise $500,000 or $1 million sort of morphed into friends and family and other people. And so we raised not that much, 100-something thousand, which lasted us a year. Wow. Because unusual, and then we raised more, and we've been raising ever since. So we've raised about $1.5 million totals now over 5 years. Because we're a little bit unusual, unlike a lot of product companies, is that we had, and we were worried about this because we're sort of 2 white guys here in China.
Right.
And
were you approaching Chinese VCs?
No, most of our money comes from Silicon Valley.
Okay.
And we sort of 2 white guys starting a business here and want to be able to prove we can do this. So we actually had an office, employees, customers, and revenue before we had a legal company. In the sense that we had that all put together and then it kind of all came together right at once. We had it all lined up versus let's start a company, let's get money, and then let's go find customers, and let's spend a year kind of getting somewhere. Yeah. We sort of put it all together in the fall of 2008.
Is that how people kind of, especially entrepreneurs in the tech scene especially, kind of have to go, just given the amount of time it takes to start up a company here? And
that's what I would advise. I'm not sure people do that. Right. I think a lot of people operate under the radar also. Yeah. Because if you don't have revenue, you sort of don't need to do that. You can work as a set of loose contractors and just go get somebody's office and build a product, which is how I think most people do it. Yeah. But we're offering a professional service. Sure. And so customers want to see licenses and they want to invoice you, and you have Fapiao and bank payments. Yeah, So we had revenue right from day one. And that's unusual. Reality is most startups that are doing, development startups don't have that. They have an incubation period. So that was a little bit different for us, but obviously the more cash you can get in early. So we were cash flow either positive or at least had money coming in right from the beginning. Right. And so that helped us sustain the business for a long time and be able to grow through that. And then we've grown about 100% a year. Wow. Not every year, but mostly through those years. And so we'll grow another 100% this year. And so, but we still need to grow faster. Now, we're still a little early.
So are you will you be raising money in the future to, expand more rapidly?
Yes.
Because the company is obviously making money and you can sustain yourselves and grow at a certain clip with your ongoing operations, right? But
we have been. We're not making money right now because because if you make money, you can't use the investment. So we're actually investing. We just raised some more money this spring, and we are investing in additional sales and operational resources now to sort of grow into the fall. And we'll raise more money this fall, end of this year.
And what sort of big clients do you guys have, using as clients, using your services, operational clients?
There's a whole lot. Some we can't talk about, unfortunately, some of the more exciting ones. But one of our customers, for example, is ASOS, which is a large, we have a lot of foreign companies coming in. So ASOS is a big European, the biggest European sort of e-commerce company. And so we build and run their operation here in China. Right. So that's very exciting. They came to us to build a big private cloud. And that's been very successful. And we also have a number of other European retailers and some American stuff. We have a number of also Chinese games and operations and companies. I'm not sure how I can mention. So, but
I noticed on your website, just a point of interest, we had Pascal Coppens from Let's Face on here a few weeks ago, and I noticed that you guys work with them.
Yes, we've been with Let's Face, I think, since the beginning, or very early on when they first launched.
Right. Yeah. So where do you see ChinaNetCloud in 5 years?
We're taking over the world. It's actually on our business card. It says running all the world's internet servers, and we take that very seriously. The company we look at as sort of our analog, sort of outside of China, is a company called Rackspace, which is based in Texas. And so they're one of our partners for a lot of things, and they're doing about $1.5 billion in this space. even though we do a lot of things they can't do, and they do things that we wouldn't do in terms of data centers and so on. But they're doing nearly $1 billion just in what we do, and so that's where we see ourselves.
Right.
Maybe not to the $1 billion level yet, but but everything we do works in China, in U.S., in Europe, everywhere around the world.
Right.
And so we really see this expanding, taking over the world.
Right.
There are 10 million servers out there. We want to run them all. And so we gear ourselves, though, for that kind of scale, even though we can't do it today, obviously.
Now, you mentioned that what you guys provide, the service you provide, is somewhat different than AWS and a few of the other big players out there. Do you see at some point in your expansion coming up against them in competition, or do you offer a slightly different approach that competition with them is not going to be direct?
No, yeah, definitely. We are definitely complementary to all of these guys.
Right.
So we're an Amazon reseller, and we're their core launch partner here in China. When they launched last year in December, did the big thing. We're their operations sort of management partner, along with some of our other partners. So it's all in the family, you might say. But no, we sit on top of that. So their job is to provide the cloud infrastructure and the servers. Our job is to build and run to manage it all.
Right.
So they're critical, they and other people too. In China, our big partner for this is Alibaba, Aliyuan. And so we launch customers on that platform, and one of Alibaba's biggest resellers today. And so, no, this is not competitive at all in that sense. They really can't do what we do.
Right.
Some of them have tried. And reality is around the world, any sort of data center or infrastructure provider that's ever tried this other than Rackspace has failed.
Right.
Because it's such a different, it's extremely high touch, it's very high velocity, it's very high integration. On the internet side, it's very difficult. There are a lot of companies that do what we do on the enterprise, the business side. I mean, IBM does this, HP, all these big guys for corporations. So they will run, if you're Citibank, IBM will come in and take over and run everything for you. It's great business. But they won't do it on the internet side.
Right.
It's much, much faster, much more difficult. So maybe they'll buy us someday. But we're in the exciting part. Because fortunately for us, all of their stuff is all moving online.
Right.
It's not the other way around. So everybody's coming to our playground, and we'll be the dominant player. And so that's a good thing.
Exciting. So being that you're in China, I wanted to ask you, because you have you probably encounter this on a day-to-day basis. What's the state of the union on the Chinese internet, and why does it get slower when it rains here? What's with all the issues with the Chinese internet and the speed, and how does that impact your business?
Well, there's different issues. The Chinese internet is a sort of big, interesting place. We actually publish books on this topic, on like running infrastructure in China and the Chinese internet sort of structure, both legally and other things. I think you have to differentiate, though, between domestic performance and international performance. Right. So as foreigners, people say, oh, well, gee, the internet's slow. They usually mean the internet from the West is slow. I can't load my website.
Websites from the West.
Yeah, I can't read my newspapers, or I can't get on my banking, or I can't X, Y, and Z, right? My sites outside of China are slow, which obviously are not a priority for the Chinese. That is definitely the case. There's the Great Firewall. There's just undersea cables that are always busy, and there's security issues, and this is getting worse, certainly. Domestically, it's a completely different issue, though. For regular Chinese users, actually it's gotten better, I think, over the years. The problems we had when we were at Tudou were much worse. And part has to do with the way the internet is structured here. The connectivity, there's northern internet sort of infrastructure and southern, so the ChinaNetCom in the north, China Telecom in the south, plus the mobile networks, plus the student networks. And these things are not really well connected. And so it's not nearly as easy as you would think, and not nearly as easy as in the West to connect all this together. It's not so easy to just go buy a server, put it on the internet, and make it available beautifully to everybody. That's very expensive.
Right.
A lot of our clients do that because they tend to be more premium brands, higher end, and you can get better performance for that. Yeah. But for your average random guy building something small, that's not so easy. And although it has been getting better because this multi-connected sort of interconnection system is getting less expensive and becoming more common, and many of the clouds have it.
Right.
So one of the advantages now of actually going on Aliyuan or Alibaba's cloud is you get extremely good connectivity almost for free.
Right.
Where before you had to pay a lot of money to get that. So we do put people there for that. So that I think is helping, but not all clouds can afford that. So that's another issue.
You also have a bird's eye view, I guess we can say, on the tech and startup scene, because you work with so many of the companies. For so many of those companies, you are a sort of backbone, or you're an essential component to their operations. everyone we have on this show, we talk about how the tech and startup scene is growing, specifically in China and in Shanghai, obviously, given that's where we are. What's your take on, over the past 5 years or over the past 2 years, how much things have grown, how much more activity there is this year than last versus the year prior? Just, what's your general take on the startup and tech scene generally?
I don't know if I have a good sense of how the growth is going. I think there's always been the split between Shanghai and Beijing.
Sure.
And I think it appears that Beijing is sort of pulling more ahead. They already were ahead and had more stuff. They're finally getting more organized. Innovation Works and companies like that, I think, have helped up there. And sort of the whole Haidian area and so on is getting more organized and producing better stuff and investors. There's certainly a lot more investment going on and a little more diversity, and you're getting more stuff in the South. So I think definitely it's all a good market. It's still, to me, broadly, lags so far behind Silicon Valley in its ability to put people and service providers and ideas together. Mm-hmm. But everywhere in the world lags behind. But to go, like I said, if you look at these sites in the Valley that list all the events, you could go to 100 a day on everything in the world. The latest Java programming thing, the hottest biotech, wearables, X, Y, and Z, legal issues of patents in Africa, all kinds of things. And it's every day relentless, and you have none of that here. There's a little more on the Chinese side, but sort of the whole networking, the whole connecting people. Of course, there's Guanxi and these things, very important. But the communities coming together, a lot of it happens online. People on Weibo or whatever and kind of talking about stuff. But the getting bodies in a room to work on stuff and network and meet people and cross-fertilize and people moving between companies is still not, and nowhere in the world is nearly what Silicon Valley is.
Sure.
But that's still a missing, given how big the market is here, that seems that's still missing. I mean, Haidian does a little bit of that, but a lot of students up there.
Yeah, we've had some people on the show actually that are involved in kind of those community building,
the bar camps.
That sort of stuff. And great to see, obviously, because those are the initial steps in bringing that community together and like-minded individuals being able to share ideas and connect with each other. But, I don't think anyone would argue that it's a long ways behind most of the, Silicon Valley or New York or London or Tel Aviv or wherever.
Anywhere, and that's a challenge. I mean, bar camp, those guys, they're sort of the same as they were 5 years ago, 8 years ago when I first started going to them, and the same people go. So you're not getting a lot of new crossfit, and they're, it's one every quarter kind of thing. And this moment TechCrunch is happening in Beijing. That's actually pretty good. That's a big event.
Right. Well, hopefully
it's getting there.
Little by little. And actually, we've got Bob of People Squared. I don't know if you're familiar with the workspace People Squared. But I think they started about 2 or 3 years ago with one space, and I think this year they're opening their 6th, and it's a big co-working space. So those sort of things and community events happen there, and obviously the spread of co-working spaces is indicative of the tenants that are occupying them. So
absolutely. And also the 3D printer stuff and the hacker markets and kind of the electronics guys putting together little innovative devices.
And that's a great point. The hardware market, especially in China, because this is the epicenter for hardware, certainly. And we had Todd from China Accelerator on here a couple weeks ago. And obviously, Cyril is down in Shenzhen doing the Hackcelerator, which is completely hardware-based, which by all accounts is doing very well. And obviously, that's really well positioned for China because that's where most of that stuff takes place, and the procurement and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, that's another example of low cost, right? If I have, I can dream a device and I can get it built.
Right.
And I can make something and try it. Unthinkable even 10 years ago. How I can, if I want to make a new microwave or a new XY, it was $1 million and a year to get something built. And now, for a variety of reasons, I can put it together. And because 3D printing is another whole world yet to even begin to start.
For sure.
And so those are all, and China will do better, like you said, in those, and is a little better positioned in some ways.
Right.
And the low cost, of course, is very important. Because a lot of guys have ideas. You just need a way to get it out there.
So we're going to change it up a bit now, Steve. You've done a number of things in your career. One of them is you've recently written a book, I believe, right?
Yeah, about 10 years ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay, 10 years ago. Yeah. Not so recent. But it was called Offshoring the Middle Class. Can I just get a review or a brief overview of what that book was about? And if it was 10 years ago, how any of your predictions there have either been confirmed or didn't come true?
Right. Well, the review is it's a great book. Everyone says that. But it was an interesting process. And so I was actually looking for something to write about, and so it's really about two different things, and it's about offshoring and the fundamental concept of offshoring the middle class, as the title suggests. And I went to school in Japan in the 80s, and I'm an old manufacturing guy. So I grew up building factories and construction and all that. So heavy industry actually is my first love. All this stuff is secondary.
Oh, really?
I love big machinery and factory systems. But the idea was, that's normal. We saw that in the 70s and 80s where your, Rust Belt, auto manufacturing, machinery, whatever, sort of all got offshored basically to Japan or other places. And so those industries got hollowed out. And if you ever spent any time in Detroit, which I have, it's a pretty sad, depressing
it's not a pretty sad
kind of place. Yeah. And so, but that, my thesis sort of is people expect that a little bit. Hey, if you go today, go to school and sort of don't graduate from high school or don't get a college degree and you have a blue collar job, in a factory, you're kind of not surprised that someone else can do that similar job of screwing tires on a car somewhere else cheaper than you, right? And you're not surprised, kind of, even though it's unhappy to get offshore. But what happens when that happens to the middle class? What happens when you're sort of
the accounting
white guy, in Colorado who's got an MBA, who's been doing accounting for an insurance company for 10 years, makes $100,000 a year, and has a very nice home, and his job gets offshore to India.
Right.
This is different. That's my central thesis.
Sure.
And for a variety of reasons, and then what does that mean? And so what happens? Why does it happen? And sort of following up on Tom Friedman's book, World is Flat, which came out at the same time or just before.
Really? That was 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
Wow.
And his book was really The World's Flat and Here's Why.
Yeah.
Good luck. And so I tried to be a little more, the world's flat, that's why, and here's what we can do about it.
Right.
And so I was concerned most about, what happens when that happens, right? Because the middle class becomes very upset and, of course, politics and all that kind of stuff. And then really about what can we do about that, and so how do we better prepare our citizenry for this type of thing, right? And then a lot of stuff about globalization, teaching languages, having more of a clue about the rest of the planet, sort of big piece about that kind of thing, and also more to appreciate sort of foreign interaction, and so you can't fix that completely.
Right.
So how do you lessen the impact? So it's very easy to demonize foreigners, and we see that in other parts of the world, like in Europe right now. So how do you get people more comfortable with foreignness, you might say, and foreigners, so you don't demonize, all the Mexicans and all the Chinese and all the people that are stealing all of our jobs, right? How do you impact that? How do you impact the next generation by better teaching, internationalizing the younger people to have more skills that are useful, but also to have more international component? And just how do you integrate better?
Right.
As you sort of see in New York and California and different places, but that doesn't happen in Kansas.
Right.
And so how do you deal with that? And then also other practical things about, how do you force more innovation, more immigration, more tax issues, patent reform, a lot of that kind of stuff that to me are helpful in so this overall competition.
Right. I'd be interested in reading it because it is, it's such a multifaceted issue, right? I mean, from the macroeconomic level all the way down to the individual education. There's so many factors that lead to the circumstances of your accounting job being better done and cheaper in India, in China, or whatever the case may be, or whether it's manufacturing, whether it's services,
exactly.
increasingly moving there. And you can obviously, and as an individual, you can differentiate your education and be more aware and think with clarity, and maybe take a different vein and differentiate yourself that way, specialize. But from a macroeconomic standpoint, if the government is doing things with the currency and with their trade laws and with their immigration laws, it's still really going to put you behind the eight ball. So it's so many different things that cause that shift. And I guess, and I'll get your take on this. Obviously, right now in the American middle class, we're seeing a severe, the middle class is shrinking dramatically, and wealth is shifting to the upper, let's call it 1%, whatever it might be. What do you see? And it's always interesting to consider how certain innovations in various industries might be able to turn that trend around. But you wrote a book on it, so what's your take on it?
Yeah, I guess broadly, I'm not overly concerned about all the shifts in terms of the result. I want to be part of the 1%, sort of. Right? Yeah.
Sure.
But that 1%'s always been there.
Yeah.
Now maybe it's a little more or less. I think dealing with that, they're not such an issue as much as how do we fix the middle class, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the lower classes who are the working poor and so on, which I have a lot more sympathy for. And yeah, all the things you mentioned are important, especially things like what industry can you do? Trade and things are certainly important. Trying to promote exports is something I cover, and Obama people are trying to do that. I think that's underappreciated,
Right.
and we need to export more. I mean, we export big stuff, airplanes and so on, but don't forget the guy who makes biomedical pumps. And you can see this in China. You walk into hospitals or other places, and you find equipment made by some random guy you never heard of in Kansas, for some specific need. Well, how do we help him?
Yeah.
And I think the government is doing better at that. But also, how do you do more industries? The one I point out in the book, and one of the more important ones, is the whole space thing. So this is SpaceX and Elon Musk and all these guys.
Yeah.
Extremely exciting in the sense that one, it's just cool. And I love
cool.
space and flight and airplanes and all that and stuff. But
Me too.
'cause I fly helicopters and I'm a big aviation guy. But more importantly, for macroeconomically, first of all, for the U.S. at least, the U.S. dominates this. Right? There's nobody even trying. And even now, Elon Musk can launch rockets cheaper than the Chinese can.
Right.
And the Chinese admit that. Like, we can't keep up with this. This is, first of all, just great. It also lowers the cost of getting to space, which then will create all kinds of new things we haven't even thought about yet. Micro satellites and communications and, wheat harvesting, survey systems, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it also, very importantly, produces very interesting jobs because those are physical devices. We need to have factories. We need to have guys who can bend metal.
Yeah.
We need to have, hourly workers who can operate machinery. We need to have guys who can fuel. It's a very dynamic cross-industry. It's not just Silicon Valley where it's a bunch of sort of very highly paid engineers in Silicon Valley. People like rockets have to do a lot of stuff, right? And it helps New Mexico and all that. Those things we ought to be encouraging.
Yeah.
Also, the whole DARPA stuff, where you're fostering like self-driving cars, all this kind of stuff.
High technology.
You kick it off with $1 million a thing. X Prizes, another one.
Yeah.
$1 million, it's unbelievably well spent. Right. $1 million.
You get so many different people trying to achieve that goal and get that prize that the innovation just gets exponentially increased.
Remember, Charles Lindbergh's flight across the Atlantic was a prize like that.
Was it?
It was. And so we should be doing that every day on everything. And people are trying to do more of that. And again, this is almost completely an American thing.
Yeah.
And it just creates a huge number of jobs, innovation and stuff in the U.S. And, of course, that spills over lots of places. But sort of keeping the middle class, and they all need accountants, and they all need all these jobs, right? They're not all in the middle of nowhere. But these types of macroeconomic things, skilled immigration, obviously we're in a big competition for talent. The U.S. does pretty well. 10 years ago, it was after 9/11, so it was hard to get a lot of immigrants in. Now that's become easier, but, stuff gets stalled in Congress and all these kind of issues are all very important. Plus, obviously taxes and innovation and capital gains and all this stuff has impact in the macro sense of how things get funded. And there's so much money floating around now. But there's a valley of death sort of concept, which is things get easy to get early stage money and hard to get through sort of this valley of innovation. Not so much anymore on tech stuff like apps, but it's still important in drugs, still important in things that cost money, rockets and stuff also. Yeah. Those things don't make themselves for free, right? Sure. I can build and launch an app in the world for $500,000. I can't launch an airplane for that. And so how you fund those type things, I mean, there's thinking about that, but we could do more on that kind of stuff.
Now you mentioned drugs, and I know you don't have unlimited time with me, though. I'd love to keep you here. So I'll run through a few things relatively quickly, and then we'll clue it up. But I think I read somewhere that you're, and again, speaking about drugs and perhaps the future of drugs, you mentioned you have an interest in nanotechnology and stem cell research and that sort of thing. I think that was
right. Yeah, I used to help run a nanotech group in Silicon Valley.
Health and wellness is really a huge interest for me, and it's my profession. And I'm always looking at the way new technologies, whether they be wearables or healthcare services or whatever they may be, might impact the way we measure our health, interpret our health, keep track of our health, and then improve our health in some way. The whole quantified self biohacking movement is really really gathering steam. Do you have any thoughts on nanotech and kind of the way technology is getting involved in medicine that could take shape over the next few years?
I think nanotech's a little different in that's already sort of permeating a lot of things. And that's because nano is very high tech, very scientist, very white coat kind of thing, and very interesting. Has some ups and downs to it. Mm-hmm. But I think the rest of it, absolutely. I've always been a big fan of sort of the more tech, sort of the pills you can swallow, all this kind of stuff. I'd like to see more in-home medical care stuff. Mm-hmm. China talked about it for a little while in Shanghai. They haven't done it yet. I'd love to see a home medical analysis system where you can plug in little modules for diabetes or for heart monitoring and would transmit that over the internet to wherever, right? The problem is if you built this in the U.S. under FDA, it would cost $10,000.
Sure.
But if we can build it somewhere for $50,
Right.
it may not be that accurate. But today we got nothing, right?
Yeah.
And wearables are part of that. They're kind of already walking down that path.
Well, there's even, I was looking the other day, there's even things that do, take a sampling of your blood, and it's an attachment for your iPhone, and all the different information you get from that. And then, of course, when you upload that data to, cloud computing servers and stuff like that and aggregate it, then en masse you're able to see healthcare pictures for populations, but also you're able to diagnose, look at what works in terms of treatments and diagnosing.
Absolutely. And I think that that's big data, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that absolutely is going to be, in the next 10 years, very helpful at a street level. In other words, it helps your doctor do a better job with you, and particularly with the elderly, and a lot of other people that, have challenging interaction with the healthcare system. Don't all have iPhones, but I think that's going to be a big sort of everyday consumer type of technology.
Right.
And then, the wearables, the Fitbits, all that kind of stuff. They're modestly interesting, but where they evolve is going to be interesting.
Sure.
And then the pills you swallow, and then the genetics. We know if you sequence cancer, you get different. You got breast cancer. Well, there's 9 different types. Right. Which one do you have? And that controls how we treat that. That's a huge step forward. Your genome and the cancer genome together, how the virus is, all that stuff. Still fairly new. We can sequence you now in a day or two. Right? Couldn't do that before. The future prediction of stuff, and then all this. Then, because you get into dangerous areas about changing my genome, choosing your baby based on
ethical
genome.
stuff,
real, and that stuff's all coming. Those are we'll work our way through it. Right?
Well, again, with so many things we've been discussing today, the convergence of so many things in the healthcare industry, the wearables and our understanding of the human genome and various biological processes and epigenetics, and companies, like you said, the Fitbits and that sort of thing are really just a novelty at this point. They're not really that valuable in terms of diagnostics or anything, but you can see that that's where it's going. Companies like 23andMe and YouBiome, who can give you an idea of what your genes say and what you're susceptible to and things like that. I mean, it's, to me, incredibly fascinating, but certainly over the next 5-10 years to be able to really, because up till this point we have, diet and exercise, and that's how you should be healthy, but to be able to get a real-time picture of actually what your health is and then have the information to make changes as and where they are needed. I mean,
exactly, and do it affordably.
Yeah. So for life expectancy, life quality, I mean, seemingly all these things are going to be dramatically disrupted. And the healthcare industry, certainly I think a lot of people have issues with as it is right now. And it's rife for people wanting to disrupt it and create, more cost-effective, more convenient solutions. So hopefully that's all in the near future. So you mentioned that flying helicopters was your hobbies. I'm always interested in the people we have on this show, like yourself, who have taken a different route in life and have done interesting things. What stands behind just what you do professionally? So you mentioned you fly helicopters. I mean, that's a relatively unusual thing. What's all that about?
Oh, it's fun, actually. Well, I grew up flying. My father was a pilot for many years, not commercially, but he was in the military a long time ago. And one of the greatest things in the 70s was that if you were in the military at all in like the 50s when he was, they would pay for all flight training you want, which again is a great thing. We should be doing more of this. Has stopped. We should be having more pilots because that makes more innovation, makes more new things, right? So he paid in the 70s, I think, to study flying. He paid something like $10 an hour to go and learn. He has all these degrees and all these things, and he never really used it a lot, but a lot of other people did and became new things and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so I was always around planes and so on my whole life. And
so it was a natural extension for you to get
and I'm
involved.
a big aerospace and flight guy, and then I always thought helicopters were more cool. And they are. They're actually a lot. Flying helicopters are so completely different than a small airplane. You get to see so much more. You're flying slower. You're in a glass ball. If you're in a regular plane, the window is only about maybe a foot high or 2 feet high. You can sort of see way out ahead, but you can't see below you unless you kind of look out the side. Helicopter, you're like suspended in a glass ball, like flying around over the trees and the ocean. I fly in California over the ocean, the whales, and so on.
Amazing.
It's quite cool.
So how often do you fly?
These days, I don't.
Hardly.
Yeah.
Cool.
And here, it's really nearly impossible.
Sure.
So when I spend more time back in California, I sort of pick it up again. But it's actually a lot of fun, and it's beautiful.
I'm always interested in knowing, people like yourself that I'm not trying to be overly flattering here, but are high performers generally, that get stuff done, that are innovators, that are leaders. What their, if any, their routines look like. Do you have any sort of morning routines, any rituals, any things that you make sure that you most of the time stick to that give you the mental clarity, capacity, energy to do what you do?
I'm not sure I have any. I guess I work all the time, so I suppose. I do email. I'm the email king, I suppose. Also, I send and receive about 150,000 emails a year. And I actually track it each year. At the end of the year, I figure out how many emails I sent and received last year.
So you're not one of these people that is like the anti-email revolution where people batch their emails and only look at it once or twice a day.
So I do more of that. So recently, because I do so much email, I've been working on how to get more efficient. So the first thing I did, I moved to a Mac Air last year. And I have about 1 million emails in my email system. And so performance is a thing for me. Because unless my email client is super fast, I'm sick of waiting for things.
Right.
So I can't use Gmail or online. They're just way too slow. And so it's really important to be quick. But I've definitely done the thing about not going to the office. So I don't go to the office as much as I used to.
Right.
And
too many distractions?
Too many distractions, and you just, you go to the bathroom, you go to the water cooler, and 15 minutes evaporates out of your life. And 30 minutes evaporates out of your life. And so actually, we have a cafe in our building in the office, and I go there in the morning. So I go to the office, but I don't go into the office.
Right.
And so I'm close by to do meetings, and people need me and so on, but I actually don't step foot. Now, in theory, I should sit in my own office, but I find that too boring. And so I work by myself a lot, and that lets me focus and concentrate. And I definitely try to batch stuff during the day. Right. But if I don't, for me personally, if I don't get stuff, I don't periodically work on email and catching up on things during the day, I get home and I have 300 things to do.
Right.
And then I have to work till 2 in the morning
to
do that. And it's hard for me to find. I'm trying to follow better this, batch out 90 minutes a couple times a day and try to do work and try to focus on stuff, especially on weekends. Like I have Chinese class today, and then the whole rest of the day I'm working, and tomorrow too, just to catch up on fundraising things and bigger projects. I do them on weekends and at night. So during the day, my real job I have to do nights and weekends because I have to do other things during the day with people and issues and meetings. And
well, people like yourself, the weekends is when you have to hustle. When you have to catch up, when you have to work on those other things. Absolutely. So there's nothing.
I hope someday it's getting better. My father is now in his 70s, and he still gets up 5, 6 in the morning and works till 9 o'clock at night, 7 days a week.
Awesome.
And I'm from New England, and so the New England hardy sort of Quaker kind of work ethic is there, right?
Well, that's not to be trifled with. That's a big element. But it's funny, a lot of people in the younger generation and the way that the work lives have developed, weekends become write-offs, whether it's because you have a big drinking night on Friday and Saturday, or it's DVD and pizza and relatively little activity. And it wasn't dissimilar for myself for a long time, but then I shifted, and now on Friday or Saturday and Sunday mornings, I too am up at 6 or 7, and it's like a whole new world of what you can get done. The things you can work on. I mean, it's not. There are two extra work days to your week that you can, and now they don't have to be
and
work.
They're quiet.
It could be, they're quiet. They can be side projects. You can relax a bit while you're doing it, but they're still moving things forward.
Well, every weekend I don't have time to work out enough. That's a big problem.
Yeah.
I actually don't like working out, but if I need to, especially in Shanghai.
Yeah.
And so weekend mornings, I do that. First thing I get up, go to the gym.
Right.
And that's where I read. So I have a Kindle, and so I read about 20 or 30 books a year. So I track all my books and all my movies and stuff. So I do a little review so I can remember what I actually read.
Right.
And the Kindle's just been a godsend, right? Because you can get books.
I was crazy for Kindle, but then I became an Audible freak because it's even easier. You're biking around, you're in a taxi, and just pop it in. And
I haven't done that much. I'm an audiobook fan, but I don't do that much. I need to do more. But like when I'm on the gym, I read all the time. I go to a cafe after, and so I read a whole mix of stuff from business to random spy novels and things and China stuff and all that. So that's my reading time, kind of. And then I have Chinese class, and then then work. And so it's.
So I've got 2 more questions for you, and this second last one I've never done before, so bear with me. But I want to do, if you're comfortable with it, a word association, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to say it's actually a person association. So I'm going to say a person, and I want you to give me like a 1 or 2 word, what pops in your head first, all right?
Okay.
All right. So, first one, Steve Jobs.
Apple innovation.
Jeff Bezos.
Customer service.
Nice. JFK.
Leadership.
WeChat.
Convenience.
Chairman Mao.
China.
Genghis Khan.
Leadership also.
Jack Ma. Don't say leadership.
Scale.
And future.
Exciting.
Awesome. Last question. Everyone that sits in that chair, I ask them if they can give 3 pieces of advice that they could give to either their younger selves or people, younger people today that want to get involved or are just getting involved in the tech, the startup, that sort of scene? And specifically here in Shanghai and China, what are 3 pieces of advice that you could give them that would help them maybe avoid some mistakes or just help them along on their way?
Well, one would certainly be, get involved. And
Right.
get involved now.
Get involved in the scene, the community,
Yeah,
and
get
start
involved in the
making
scene,
connections.
meet people, because you're going to need all those people.
Right.
And if you're doing it already, doing it as in startups or something already, then, get friends, get other people. Don't work by yourself.
Right.
Key thing of Silicon Valley is it's all a big community, and everybody helps everybody else.
Right.
It's ridiculously helpful to other people. If one thing signifies Silicon Valley, it's everybody will help everybody else for free, anytime, for anything.
Really?
I mean, it really is that sort of, because you never know when it comes back, right?
Right, right.
Karma kind of thing. And even the biggest, most famous people will help. You can even see them mail to Steve Jobs. He wouldn't necessarily help you, but he would at least answer. And so that's one. One is also, so one's getting involved, but one is just do it, right? Get out. Don't sit in a big company and do nothing and sort of be content in what you're doing. If you have an idea, try it. Now, you can do it on weekends. You can do it part-time. Mm-hmm. You can go study. It's not nearly, especially if you're young, it's not nearly as risky as you think. What's the worst that can happen? Right. And if you get out there, take a risk, do something, fail, do it again, failure is not that much of a problem.
Right.
So that's really important. And, surround yourself by similar people, especially optimistic people that are doing things, that you want to do or can help you, but also people that are, positive. It's very important to have positive people in your life.
Be selective who you surround yourself with.
Yeah, it's very important. And because sort of this whole, I just saw a thing yesterday that I've seen before of the number one predictor of success of happiness long term is the network of which you surround yourself.
Right. And you're the average of your 5 best friends and
something
that sort
like
of thing.
Yeah. And if they're all miserable, if they're all fat, slothy, and miserable, guess where you're going to end up, right?
Yeah.
But if they're all high-achieving, exciting people, and now, of course, you have to make yourself worthy of sort of being with them, right?
Yeah.
If you're boring and uneducated and don't track anything, well, they don't want to hang out with you.
Sure.
Right? So how do you always continuously better yourself, learn new things, get more exciting? And that could be anything. It could be in flower arranging, could be in tech stuff, could be in painting, could be lots of it can be okay to be solitary, but it really is a community effort and a lot of stuff, and just get involved.
Right.
And get out, and whatever it is, like the Nike thing, just do it. Just do something, especially in China, especially where it's easy, especially where it's cheap, especially where you're young.
Especially where there's energy and ambition and nowness to everything.
Yeah. And China already has that culture of all this stuff, so just push that forward and do even more.
Right.
And then, see the world but push for excellence also.
Now I'm going to rob the final question from another tech podcast I listen to, Silicon Reel out of London. But if you could have a direct line to your 20-year-old self, would you say anything? Would you give any advice, or would you just hang up the phone and say he'll figure it out?
I would have moved to Silicon Valley earlier.
Right.
I got there too late.
Want a bit of that tech boom money?
Yeah, exactly. and I should have gone. I had the opportunity to go to Stanford for my MBA in the 80s, and I should have gone.
Right.
More because it would have got me out there and would have got me there. So it'd be 30 years ago now, but 25. But I should have gone to California. Like I always should have gone to California early, and that's still true here and anywhere else. Right? Go to California.
Right.
Just go. Right. It's like going to China. If you're a foreigner, come to China.
Yeah.
If you're in China or anywhere else, or not thinking about can't come to China for whatever reason, go to California.
California, not such a hard sell. Beautiful weather.
Yeah.
Great
but Shanghai also, I think, and there's different things here. I mean, there's other exciting places to be in the world. Go to Vietnam.
Sure.
Go to Burma.
Yeah.
Go to these places that are much more cutting edge than China is at the moment.
Yeah.
But are more challenging at many levels. So it depends what you're interested in. If you're not in China and have anything to think about, just come. Just seriously, just come. It's not that hard to get here, get a visa, be whatever.
Buy a ticket.
Get
a tourist visa. You'll sort it out when you get here.
Sort it out when you get here.
That's what I did.
And bring some skills. Exactly. And most of the stuff that's built here, that was built by foreigners, is exactly that.
Yeah.
Or not a lot. But likewise, if that doesn't make sense for you, go to California. If you're in Europe somewhere or you're in the U.S. or whatever, just go.
It's still the center.
Still
so much going on.
Just like going to Hollywood in the 20s and 30s and 40s, going to New York for Broadway.
Right.
You have to go. Eventually, bring some skills.
Right.
Have a clue. You know what you're doing. Add value.
Prepare yourself.
Yeah, prepare yourself. That may be 2 years from now, right? What's going to be valuable when I get there?
Right.
How can I learn PHP or design or build some apps and have a portfolio, right? Think as like an artist. You have to have a portfolio or some value or whatever you're doing, or 3D market or printed, whatever. And show up and network your butt off.
Yeah.
And there's opportunity there and here. Exactly the same.
That's great advice. Steve, thank you very much for being on the show today. I know you're super busy. I know also you don't get enough emails, so if anyone wants to get in touch with you or learn more about ChinaNetCloud, where can they do so?
Well, you can certainly go on our website, ChinaNetCloud.com. I also have a private website. I have SteveMushero.com and Mushero.com.
Oh, sorry, Mushero. Okay.
I have both.
Okay.
Steve Mushero and Mushero.com. They're kind of outdated. Have helicopter pictures. But, I'm easy to find.
Cool. And we are Tech in Shanghai. You can find us at Tech in Shanghai on Twitter, or our website is now live, and we've got all of our episodes up there. So techinshanghai.com, and, of course, we're on iTunes, Tech in Shanghai. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Tech in Shanghai podcast. If you enjoyed the show, subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter at Tech in Shanghai for everything tech from Shanghai and China. See you next time.